check. It looks like my little sound meter is working, so we are ready to start sewing. I see a lot of people jumping online. I guess this one is a pretty popular project. So tonight we are working on lesson 2 of the bog coat, and I'm taking a lot of the questions that you guys had, and I'm going to go ahead and answer them at the beginning. I'm going to demo how to cut the coat, put it together really quick, and then you're going to see how fast this is. You're going to probably be able to make 2 or 3 of these before the holidays as gifts. All right, my name's Yvonne. Welcome to the Jelly Roll Club. If you like all the free stuff that I provide, please subscribe to the channel. That's all that I ask. All right, so let me share my desktop and show you what we've got. So if you go to my website and you go to www.jellyrollclub.com, you're going to go across either on the left or across the top, the banner, and you're going to see something that says Repurpose Quilts. It's going to take you here. So we've already finished one type of coat, and we made that using a sweatshirt base. And that one is just using all of your scrappy blocks. There's 4 lessons in that one and 1 handout. And then we are on episode 2 of the bog coat. The last time we were together, we had a handout that looked like this. I showed you how to cut the neck piece, and I described how to measure your body to get your rectangle ready. But during that episode, there were a lot of questions. I wasn't going to make a second handout, but I decided to go ahead and do that. So welcome. Oh, look at all the newbies. Welcome, everybody. So I made a second handout to clarify everything from the first video, all the questions you guys posted online, all of this stuff. So let's look at that handout. Let me close this. So the first thing that you're going to see is I updated this. And I said, for reference, I'm using width of fabric that's 32 inches. That is the starting length of my coat. My finished length is going to be about 31 inches, and I'll tell you guys why. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to just measure your body, because in order for you to figure out the rectangle that you need to measure yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'm going to show you really quick how to do that. All right, so you're going to take your tape measure, and you're going to measure your body at the widest point. That for some ladies is their chest, and for other ladies that may be their hips. So you're just going to take, and my widest point is my chest. So I'm just going to measure that, and it gives me 42 because I have some large friends. And so then what I'm going to do is come over here to this chart, and I'm going to find, let me share my desktop, I'm going to find my measurements. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to show you my original chart. So I copied and pasted this from a Google sheet. So this is the spreadsheet that I used. And let me make that bigger for you so you can see it. So this is my original spreadsheet, and that might make it easier. So my original measurement was 42. That was my widest W. I'm going to add 12 inches, and I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to get a rectangle that's 55 by 42. 55 wide by 42 long. Now, if I had just gone across here, it would have been the same. But the measurements that matter are these over here. You're going to hear me reference 1. That's the depth of your sleeve. The next one is, number 2, is how wide each side panel is. And then number 3 is how wide the back of your garment is. And the reason I put that on there is because you need to know those measurements in case you need to make adjustments. All right, so now let's look at what we've got. Does this make sense to everybody what I'm talking about? Okay, I'm going to come over to my cutting table, and you can see my cutting table, and I'm going to walk over there and show you what I have. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do, and I'm going to go back to my desktop really quick, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make cut number 1, which is this neck part right here where I made the template. And so last time we were together, I made a template, and so I'm cutting this part number 1. And for mine, that's going to be 21 inches. First, I'm going to square up my big square, And then I'm going to do 1, which is measurement number 1. So from the top front down the side, I'm going to do 1 cut. I'm going to do a second cut on the left side. I'm going to measure from the front down, and I'm going to make that second cut. And then last, I'm going to cut this part for the neck. And those are the only cuts. There's 3 cuts. So let me go over here to my table so you guys can see what I'm doing, okay? So let me go to the cutting table. So I've got this cutting table set up. And what I have here is I have laid out a big rectangle. I actually made this one from an old tablecloth. So this is an old tablecloth that I had, and I just quilted it together so that I could practice because I didn't want to do this with my good one. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to square this up. When you're sewing with such a big piece of fabric or an old quilt, you need to measure in several places before you start cutting. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a giant ruler that I have. So this is like a giant square. It's 18 inches. And I'm going to measure this. I like to use, I have a metal meter stick that I love to use for these kinds of projects. And then I have a couple of longer rulers that I set aside for these kinds of things. I'm going to put them under the table. All right, so the first thing that I need to do is measure this. This is a little bit bigger than what I needed because I just quilted a small tablecloth that I had that went on a card table. All right, so this one is, it says it's 58 inches. I need it to be 55. So what I'm going to do is I need to remove 3 inches from this end. So I'm just going to take one of my smaller rulers, and this one is actually a 3-inch ruler. Yep. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this off. So I'm going to take, this has already been squared up for the most part, and I'm going to take, and I'm just going to draw a line across here. And I'm just using a marking pen. And I'm going to go along this line and mark. Along here, what I'm going to cut off. Now, before I cut this chunk off, I'm going to double check it by laying it down and just using my tape measure all the way down. And that looks correct. I'm going to move that to several locations to make sure that my measurements are accurate. And if I cut along that line, it looks like this is going to be 55 inches, which is what I want. So let me move that out of the way. You can use a ruler like this. I suggest pinning it in a couple of places because when you have something like this, it can get out from under you, or you can even use clips, and that just keeps it from sliding. So you can either clip it or pin it. I use a couple of safety pins, and that just keeps these layers from shifting because I am cutting 2 layers of quilted fabric. And because I'm doing that, I want to make sure that I'm cutting those nice and neat, that they're not going to slide around and do crazy things. All right. I can use this ruler. I'm going to use a big, ginormous rotary cutter, or I can use a scissor. Either one will work. You have to just kind of push down, but be very careful not to cut your hand, because your rotary cutter can jump this thing and cut your hand. A lot of times I may come in here at the end and just take a scissor and get a little snip, and that looks really straight. And I'm going to save these because you know what? These are going to make great bag straps. I might make a little tote bag, and these would make great straps. So don't throw those things away. Save those. Put it over here. All right, so I have 55 inches wide. And I'm going to mark this up here at the top so that I know which side is my 55-inch side. And so I'm going to put a safety pin just so that I can mark that. The next side that I'm going to mark, and I'm going to double check, is I'm going to fold it the other direction. And I'm going to check this one. So I need to trim off of this side. Oops, let me move this here. I'm not going to mark it just yet. Let me put a little, this is a Sharpie, don't use that. Here's my friction pen. I'm going to go ahead and mark this side. So I'm going to mark, this will erase, and I'm just going to put a little mark here that says 55, which direction. It just makes it easier for me, and then this type of pen irons off. So I just put a little mark in there. And I'm going to measure this. It looks like it's pretty even. This is off just a hair. So I'm going to even up these edges and get it straight before I cut it. And so now I just need to measure because it needs to be 42 inches this direction. And this is 48. So I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I may trim some off of both sides just to make sure it's nice and straight. So since this needs to be 42, I'm just going to take a little bit off of each side. I'm going to mark at 45 on this side. I'm going to find another spot right here and mark at 45. Lay it down. Mark at 45. And I'm going to take my giant square ruler because that's going to help me to stay straight on this. I want to start straight and I want to finish straight. So I'm going to line up these raw edges that are facing me. And I'm going to go ahead and start this. I'm going to line up that ruler. And the reason I do is because I want a perfect 90-degree angle on this side. I'm going to slide this over towards me. And I'm going to line this up. And that'll ensure, and I can see where I ended up very straight on this side, that it's square. All right. And now I'm going to measure this again, and I'm going to remove it from the other side. And then I know that when I'm done with this, this is going to be very straight and very, well, not square, but rectangular. So 42. So I just need to remove 1, 2, 3 inches off of this end. Yep, 3 inches. So I'm going to measure using my giant ruler. And I'm going to lay this one on there because I know the measurement. So I'm just going to line this up to make sure that all of these edges are lined up. By pushing it over like this, it'll ensure that everything is nice and straight and true. I'm going to go here and I'm going to take off this right here. And I can go ahead and mark it. If I wanted to cut it with a scissor, I could. And this giant ruler allows me to line it up. If I lay that down, that's pretty good. And so I can either cut this with a scissor or a rotary cutter, either way. I prefer to use a giant square and a rotary cutter any day when cutting this much stuff. All right. So this is how I'm cutting a piece of fabric that's larger than what I need, or a quilt that's bigger. So if you have a bigger quilt, you're just going to cut it down. Now, I have all these edges are raw. So that means that when I finish sewing my coat, I'm going to have to put quilt binding or binding around all of these edges. And so that's fine. Also, if you don't want these edges to unravel on you before you, and you want to wash it a lot, you could also either zigzag these edges, stay stitch these edges so they don't stretch, or you could also use a serger. Any of those things works perfectly fine. I have my measurement now that tells me which direction is my 55, which is my wide. So it's right there. And this is where, so it's 55 that way, right? And so this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to rotate this because 55, let me measure it, is what I'm going to do from side to side. 42 this way, 55 this way. Okay. Big wide side laying across. I'm going to double check that. All right, 55 this way. So this is my top, what I marked, my top right corner. So from here, I'm going to measure number 1 down and mark. I'm going to leave a mark here. So for me, that's 21.5 inches. So I'm just going to take my friction pen. I can use one of these, but I'm going to mark 21.5. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to make a mark right here, right at the edge. This pen erases with heat, so it's okay. I'm going to use this big thing right here, and I'm just going to put a mark. Now I'm going to take the other side all the way across. So this is the front, right, the very top front of my coat. And I'm going to take, and on the opposite side, I'm also going to mark number 1. So make sure that I'm using inches. And so I'm going to go ahead and mark right along this edge. So I have a little mark on this side and a little mark on the opposite side. Okay. I'm going to be cutting from this area. I'm going to be cutting in, right? So that's my cut number 2. So I'm going to go here, and this is going to be my cut number 2. So I'm going to take my ruler, and I want to measure from that side. 2 is 1/4 of my width. If you want to do the math, there's a formula. So I can go ahead and lay this down, and what I'm going to need is 13.5 inches. So I can lay this, and this is why I like this great big ruler. because I can line it up nice and straight. And I need 13.5, and I'm using this friction pen because it's erasable, and I'm going to go here to 13.5. I'm just going to mark it with the pen. You can use Taylor's chalk, but this is 13.5. I'm going to make the same mark on the other side where I put that number 1. I'm going to line it up with this edge, and I'm going to do this same thing. This is 13.5. I'm going to line up the 13.5 on the outside edge, and then I'm going to mark it to the end of the ruler. There's my pin. Like I said, line up that 13.5 inch on my ruler, and then I'm going to mark it. All right, so I see where I've drawn with my pen. Now I need to fold this in half. Now that I have an orientation and I know exactly where my front is and my 2 sides, I'm going to cut my neck hole. So the neck hole is halfway between this first cut. So I'm going to make a mark halfway. So this first cut here was 21.5 inches. That means, so it's all, I can round up to 22, right? So half of 22 is 11. And so I need to measure in 11 inches down the middle. So I'm going to fold this in half. I'm going to take these 2 markings right here that I've made for cut 2, and I'm going to line them up together. And I'm going to pin them. So these are my 2s. Right at the bottom of where your diagram says 1, where that ends, it's technically cut 2. And I'm going to find the middle. So this is the front, right? And I'm going to find the middle of this rectangle. And from here, I need half of this distance, because if you look at the diagram, half of this distance is where I'm going to lay my neck hole. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw this line right here. And I'm going to use the friction pen, and I'm going to draw 12 inches down. So I'm just going to lay this ruler right at 12 inches, and I'm just going to take this seam right here, and I'm just going to mark it just like this. I'm just giving myself that nice, I'm pressing down, and I'm marking that crease because that's going to be my neck hole. All right. So now I have a line right here, and this is where I'm going to lay my template for my neck hole. So I'm going to make 3 cuts. I'm going to take measurement 1, and these are going to be cut 2 and 3. And then this is where the neck hole is. So the neck hole is perfectly centered. Last time we were together, I showed you guys how to draw this template. So you have to watch video 1. There's 2 halves to it. This is 2 inches from this center line, and then this is 3 inches. This goes in the front, and this goes in the back. So the smaller one goes in the back. So if you look at the diagram, right, this is the front, technically, of my coat. So I'm going to lay this, I'm going to fold it on this line, and I'm going to lay it right there, right? So this is the center line. And I'm going to draw my neck hole with this friction pen, just like this. And then I'm going to open it, and I'm going to draw the rest. Right? So there's an imaginary line that goes this way, and it's halfway to that section. Okay, so now I'm going to cut this. Super easy. I'm going to use scissors. I'm going to cut down the center of my neck to here, and then I'm going to cut my neck hole out. The only waste you have is this little circle right here. Everything else gets used. All right, so my little neck hole is gone, and so I have something that looks like this. And if you want for me to get a closer view, I can do that in just a minute. All right, so there's my neck hole. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these to where I marked them. And so I'm just going to take my scissor and I'm going to cut and stop right there. And I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. I'm going to cut right there. So now I have an object that looks like this. And I'm going to fold it inward like this. We're going to fold it inward like this, where these two neck pieces meet. Let me move my little camera so you can get a better angle. Let me scooch it back. There we go. That's a better angle. And so now I have my two flaps. These are my sleeves. And I'm going to bring the front until it meets the front right here. And you're only going to make 2 stitches. You're going to sew these 2 seams all the way up. I'm going to go ahead and pin it so I can show it to you. And it's most important that you line it up with this front, and don't worry about the sleeve if the sleeve is off a smidge. That could have been it was out of square just a hair. All right, but before I sew it, I have to decide, do I want my seam to come to the outside and then I put banding over it to cover that seam and make it reversible? Or do I want my seam to go to the inside and then I put my banding on the inside, or I just sew it with a serger? If you want it to be like this on the outside, which is probably what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the seam to the inside, then I'll have to pin it from the other side. But before I sew this together, I'm going to have to make one tiny snip. I'm going to lift this sleeve, and in the armpit, on the back, facing towards the back, I'm going to make a little snip, a 45-degree snip, 3/8 of an inch, so that I can accommodate that. So I'm just going to snip. I'm going to use a little tiny tip of the scissor. I just want 3/8 of an inch right here, because that's my seam allowance. We're not using a 1/4 inch, we're using 3/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to snip 45 degrees towards the back. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to lift that, and I'm going to make a little snip 45 degrees towards the back side. Just like that. Now all you have to do is pin this across here and check out your measurements. If this sleeve is too wide, you don't want a big wide sleeve, this is a place where you can take some of the width of the sleeve. Is you can take this section here and you can come from this armpit area and slowly kind of make your way out and angle that. So if you don't like how wide this sleeve is, this is a good place to adjust it, and you can adjust it on both sides. I wouldn't mess with that until you pin it though. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to pin this together, and I'm going to try it on. So I'm just going to pin this right here in the front. I'm going to be using, like I said, a 3/8 inch seam. So I'm just going to take this, and let me switch the camera angle so you can see what I'm doing, and then we're going to try this on. Does anybody have any questions so far over what I have shared? All right, so let me switch camera angles and let me show you where I'm at. Okay. So one question is, did I put my neck hole at the 12 inch? No, I lined this up. So if you notice my template, let me come in front of the camera. My template that we made last week, remember, was smaller on one side and it says front. I lined this line up with the 12 inch. That's why I folded it, drew around the neck, opened it, drew around the neck, because this is what has to be lined up with that 12, is that center bullseye on my neck template. All right, so now that I've got this, I'm going to go ahead and safety pin it in a couple of places, or clip it, or whatever, it's fine. And I'm going to safety pin it because I'm going to try it on. I want to see what this looks like. I think I'm going to leave it with wide sleeves because that way it'll allow me to wear bulky things when I am, especially in the wintertime, because this one's nice and heavy. I made it with a tablecloth and I quilted it with a double layer of cotton batting. So this one is going to be quite heavy. All right, so I've put pins all over this, and then I'm going to go ahead and try it on and see what I think. And I like how this is going to fit. The sleeves are a little bit wider than what I like, but I have enough overlap in the front that if I wanted to, so I picked a good size, so if I wanted to add buttons all the way down, I could. I could even add a zipper if I wanted to add a zipper to this. So I like how this looks, but I think my sleeves are a little bit wider than what I want. So I may angle them at the ends. And so I'm going to show you how that looks. So what do you guys think? I think I definitely need to angle those. So you're just going to try it on. Now, if you have a small bosom and you feel like there's too much bulk here, you can adjust that by taking a little sliver trim of this segment right here so that your coat will lay flatter. But let me just show you how mine is laying, and I like how it lays. Your seam, your horizontal seam, will lay right across your chest. If you want to reduce the bulk in this part of your body, you can always adjust it. So let me show you on my desktop how I did that. So if you want to adjust the body, let me share my desktop. And so these are the places where you can adjust. So let's say that you're a little person, right? And you want to adjust the center bodice because it's too big. Then you can just take, if your W is less than 55, and you're going to remove those segments in yellow. So if you're like, wow, that's too big, you're just going to cut some of that and then sew it back together. Now, if you want to shorten those sleeves, you're just going to remove the ends of one, and so I may do that. So you need to think about how you're going to do that. So for me, see how this is a little bit big? I'm not sure yet. If I use buttons, it won't matter. It'll fit nicely. It'll be fitted. But if I don't have buttons, then what I may have to do is I may have to take a little bit of this and bring it in closer to the body before I sew across these sleeves. I like how this looks. Nobody knows this is a tablecloth except for my hundreds of friends online. but this was an old tablecloth and I like how it looks. I think I'm definitely going to sew it to the inside because this pattern kind of disappears and there's no reason to put stuff on the outside. So yeah, these sleeves are a little bit long. So now I'm going to go adjust that. So because my sleeves are too long, too wide, and they look more like kimono sleeves and I want narrower sleeves, I'm going to go ahead and make that adjustment. So let me see if I can do that. Okay, so I know I fitted myself. I see what I want to do. So in order for these sleeves to be narrower, I'm going to have to come in here and I'm going to have to come at an angle and remove some of the bulk. So from here, I've pinned that seam. I know where I'm coming. I'm going to have to go ahead and remove a segment. So I'm just going to take and I'm going to use my ruler. And so remember, whatever I take off here, I'm taking off double. So if I want to take off, let me see how wide is this sleeve. The sleeve is 10 inches, so it has a circumference of 20, but I don't want it to be quite that wide, so I'm just going to bring it at an angle, and I'm going to mark, I'm going to take 3 inches off. I'm taking 6 total. I'm going to mark it right here with a pencil, and then I'm going to angle that ruler towards that armpit, and I'm going to remove this. I'm just going to draw a line, and I'm going to remove that with my scissors. Pin these together so they don't slide around on you when you're cutting. And I can use my dressmaker shears for that. And then I just bring it down to nothingness. So now I have removed this. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side because that sleeve is just way too big. If I wanted to, I could put a cuff on here and a button if I wanted to make that even smaller. But this is going to be kind of big. And so I'm going to be able to, this is a tiny bit long, and so I'm going to be able to flip it over and cuff it like this. And if I change my mind, I can always come in here and make this section smaller. All right, so now let's do the other side. And I'm going to do the same thing to this sleeve that I did to the other one. Measure it out, lay it where it goes. Pin it all together, and I'm going to remove the same amount I did to the other side. So I'm going to pin this. Always pin these things together whenever you're going to do that. And I'm going to come in here, and I'm just going to lay this out just like I did the other one. Remember to mirror image this. So I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to mark with my ruler, with my pencil over here. Yep. And then I'm going to come in with the ruler, go ahead and angle it. And now I can cut that with the scissors. Yeah, these are not it. I like these big dressmaker shears. And then I'm just going to double check that I didn't lose that little 3/8 of an inch that you're going to need to lay that out. Okay, so now I'm ready to start sewing. As you can see, that is not painful. It doesn't take a long time. I actually have a second jacket. I actually found a little lap quilt that was in my closet that was exactly the size that I needed. It was 42 by 55. Is actually a little bit smaller than that. And I cut it as my practice coat. So I'm going to be sewing that here in a minute. All right, so I'm going to move that out. I'm going to turn this inside out because this is how I'm going to sew it. I'm going to sew it to my seams to the inside. If you want your seams to the outside, you need to pin it the other way. If you want your seams to the inside, you're going to do it this way. So you have to decide. All right, so I have this. And that little nip allows this to become flat. You see that? Let me try that again so you can see. This is the front. This is the sleeve. I'm going to be pinning it so that this segment is in one line, and that little nip allows that to happen. So I'm going to start here in the front, and I'm going to pin it with a big pin, and I'm going to pin it about every 6 inches. The reason I have that is because it reduces that bulk in that armpit, because it's really hard to sew a 90-degree angle. And that's what you have there. That's why we have the little snip. And you're going to put a pin right before that snip. And that allows you to continue sewing till you get to the outside. And if that's off like this, I'm okay with that, because I'm going to come in and round that up later. And then we're getting ready to sew this thing. All right. If that lays straight when you're looking at it, then just a small crook, you're fine. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to stop at this crook. I'm going to backstitch, and then I'm going to go out this direction. Let me show you what I'm doing on my sewing machine. So we're going to come over here to the sewing machine. Can you guys see my machine? Make sure it's on. And I make sure it's threaded. Oops, just poked myself. All right. There we go. I have gray thread in there. A little something about thread. You can use any thread you want. But if you want to use polyester, that works too. All right, I'm going to start sewing from the chest outward. So I'm going to sew chest outward. I'm going to back stitch. Here, let me move my mouse. I'm going to back stitch. I've got where it says a 1/2 inch, 5/8 of an inch. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam on this. So double what you normally do. So I'm going to start. I'm going to back tack. And I've pinned about every 6 inches, so I'm just going to come in. My stitch length is 2.0. Don't sew over your pins. And then you're going to have to wrestle with this thing. If you have a seam guide on your machine, you can add a seam guide. I'm just using the registration marks on my throat plate right here. And so look, you're going to have to wrestle with this thing. It's like wrestling with an alligator. And so you are going to have to wrestle with this a little bit. Let me see if I can move my camera so you can get a better view. Let me pull that out. There we go. It's literally like wrestling a gator. And so I'm putting that in there. And I'm trying not to strain my machine. When you're sewing through this many layers, you can break a needle, so go slow. There's no rush to get this done. And so just let your machine do the work. Throw this over your shoulder if that helps. For me, that's one of the things, like when you're quilting. Always work with your needle down for this particular task, and then just keep it rolling. Remove the pin when you get there. Then I'm almost at the armpit, so I'm going to make sure that this area is not bunched up, and then I'm spreading out the fabric, and I'm going to come into that armpit. I'm going to stop. I'm going to back tack. And then I'm going to rotate this just a tiny bit so that I'm straight again. And then I'm straightening all of this bulk, flatten it all out, right? So you see what I'm doing? I'm flattening out all of this bulk so that you're not making a big bubble in your armpit. And pull this out from underneath and straighten out these edges before you continue, because the last thing that you want is for this to be a big hot mess. So straightening it out, getting those edges together. Making sure that my edges are all nice and even. Pull all of this out so that it's not in the way. Even if you have to stick your finger in there. Pull all that excess out. Now you see why some of these other quilters don't show you the wrestling part. It's like the wrestling with the gator part gets omitted of most videos. All right, let me take my watch off because it's getting in the way. And now I'm just going to come straight down. And straighten that up. And there we have it. And if it's off just a little bit in this armpit section, I wouldn't worry about it if I were you. Go ahead and pull those pins, straighten out this edge so that it's nice and straight. And then I'm going to flatten that out with my hand as I feed it. There we go. Your instinct is going to be to want to sew from the sleeve inward, but you've got to sew from the chest. When I get to where the two pieces of fabric meet, I'm going to back tack this a couple of times. And I'm going to go on out. And then I'm going to rotate this jacket, and I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. I just have to pin it. All right, so let me show you what I've done so far so you can see. So let me come over here. All right, can you guys see that one? Okay, so let me come closer to the camera so you can see what I'm doing. I've got this section here that I'm now going to either zigzag or serge. If you want to trim it, you can. You don't have to. But I'm going to press that carefully. And then before I do anything else, I'm going to try this on because I just want to see what it's going to look like. And I think that's going to fit nicely. Now you see where I have this area here? This will start to lay down once this fabric relaxes because this is very stiff because this was a tablecloth. So you have to remember that. If your fabric is thinner or your quilt is smaller, it won't be that thick. But once you wash it a few times, that will come down. But I like how that looks. If you have too much in this area, then what you can do is you can adjust down in here and remove a little bit more of the bulk. But I like how this looks. One of the things that you can do is you can kind of do a tuck right here and stitch it down if you want to remove some of that bulk, but it's not necessary. And see where mine is? I like how that sleeve looks, and I might put a little cuff to bring this in with like a button. So one of the things that I can do is take a little thing, like a little tab, and bring it in here with like a button. You know, have you seen those jackets that have like a tab? So I think that's what I like. This is what the seam looks like in the front, but you have to really flatten that out, and then you won't be able to see that depending on the pattern that you used. So I think this is looking pretty good. All right, now I need to do the same thing to the other side, and this jacket is ready for some trim. But what happens if you already have a coat or you already have a quilt and your quilt already has edges that are pre-bound and you happen to have something that's exactly the same size that you need? So let me show you what I have here. So underneath my table, here, now back over here, I found this little tiny lap quilt. I cut the neck out already. I've cut everything out. This one's very floppy compared to that other one because this is a ratty old quilt that I had in my closet. So this is the tiny little lap quilt I used to keep in the car. And so I've already made all the cuts and I've used a serger. So this one here is super easy. I've measured down the side. This already has binding. Look at it. It's already pre-bound and it's scalloped. So I measured 1. I cut the neck out and then I used a serger. So this one, if I wanted to, is going to be a coat ready to go. So I'm going to do the same thing for this one. This has a scalloped edge right here. And so instead of sewing it the way I did that other one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew from the armpit in by folding this one down. And I'm going to sew like this. And then I'm going to overlap this in the front. And I'm going to hand stitch along that scallop so that I have a really pretty front scallop. And I'm going to use some embroidery floss. So I have a giant piece of embroidery thread like this and a humongous needle. I don't know if you can see that, but that's a giant needle. And I'm going to take and I'm going to hand stitch this scallop as an overlap. And because this one's already been finished with a serger, then I won't have to finish that seam. But this is if you have a jacket that already has a scallop. And let me bring this over here where you can see it. So I'm going to take this thing here and I'm going to bring my other camera over so that you can see what I'm talking about. So I don't know if you guys can see that. And so this jacket is bright red, but it has a scalloped edge that's rounded. See right there? You guys can see that edge. I'm going to sew this one by hand, and I'm going to do it by turning this up. I've cut it, the seam, the length of the seam, and I'm going to pin it, and then I'm going to ladder stitch it closed with embroidery floss. And so this one, if you want to do it this way, if you don't want your seams to show, this has been serged, this has been clipped, and then I'm going to start sewing this one, and it's going to be like this, and I'm going to ladder stitch it to the back side. So this here, I'm going to bring my needle in, and I'm just going to ladder stitch along that edge. So I don't know if you guys can see. Let me back that up. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to turn it under, I'm going to match it to that edge right there where there's binding already, and I'm going to ladder stitch that closed, and then I'm going to do the same thing in the front so that it's already finished. And so I'm just going to come through here with embroidery floss along that edge that's bound, and then this will also be another finished jacket. And so as you can see, you can use a pre-finished quilt like this one. You can use a panel that you make. You can buy a cutter quilt for these things. Let me show you this one. I think I'm going to leave these sleeves wide like a kimono because I like how this looks. And I'm just going to pin it right there where I want these pieces to fit. And let me show you what this looks like. And that's it, friends. This is actually super easy. No wonder our ancestors 4,000 years ago, this was their way of making clothing. The first bog coat was actually found in a peat bog in the Netherlands, the oldest version of this jacket. A lot of people in the Middle Ages wore jackets like this. They wore them under their armor. They wore them as their daily coats. They wore them as utility coats, and this is how they did it. So this one's going to end up looking like this. All right, friends, let me show you the finished kind of look this is going to have, and then let me know if you have any questions. So this one right here, I'm going to overlap. If you notice, this is going to overlap. I'm going to sew. This already has a serged edge. I'm going to sew with embroidery floss across that scallop. And as you can see, it fits differently because it is made with a floppy old quilt. And so this one is going to be, I think, my favorite. And I'm going to leave it kimono style, and I'm probably going to wear this. So these sleeves, I'm going to take in a hair on this back section, and then I think I'm going to wear this one kimono style. All right, friends, this is it. You're going to see me wearing these coats when it gets cold. I'm super excited. If you want this to be a short-sleeved jacket, if you don't want the sleeves to be really long, you don't have to make them long. But I think I'm really going to enjoy this one. This one might be a keeper for me. And if you have the measurements correct, I can come in here and do some ties, or I can do some buttons, and maybe I can even curve the neck. So if I don't want this neck to be straight, I can even come in and just curve it. And that's it. Look at how pretty this is going to end up. This is an old ratty lap quilt that was in my closet, just languishing, and now it's going to be a new jacket. All right, friends, let me know if you have any questions. Let me see if I have my mouse somewhere over here. Does anybody have any questions about the bog coat? All right. All right, friends, I think this is it. You guys can see this is going to be I think this is going to be my favorite. I love that it has that finished edge. So if you have and you want to scallop those edges and bind them, this is what this one's going to look like. It's going to be like 3/4 length sleeve because it was a little bit smaller than the rectangle I needed. All right, everybody, happy sewing. Please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to check very carefully all of these measurements before you start making your cuts. Don't forget this neck part. You have to center the template that we made last episode with this midline. So you measure to that midline, and then you go ahead and you cut it out. All right, upcoming projects. So Tina wants to know what's happening. So if you go to Facebook, if you don't have Facebook, that's fine. I'll go ahead and share. And you go here. I posted what we have coming up. We have Quilted Postcards Part 1 on November the 30th. We also have Krabby Patty that we're working on. You guys see that behind me. Favorite Things Block of the Month is on Sunday, December the 14th. On the 21st, I have last minute gifts that you can do in less than an hour. I'm going to be showing you a couple of cute little things. And I may do a postcard a day. If I have some time, depending on what's going on at work, I may do a postcard a day. On December the 28th, I shared a picture. Let me see if I can find it. On my page of a pattern that I was working on. So if you look at a pattern I was working on, it looks like this, and it's called Jelly Bricks. So we're going to be making jelly bricks the 28th of December. Let me see, what other questions do we have out there? How am I going to finish the neck? I'm going to put bias binding on this one, but if I really wanted to, see how that is serged? If I wanted to, I could just turn it under and top stitch it. So if you want to just serge the neck like this one, let me take it off so you guys can see. I could literally just take that neck that's been serged and I could turn it under. So you could just zigzag the edge, and then all that you're going to see on the inside is like a little edge that looks like this. So I could just stitch that down if I wanted to. Or you could put binding on it. It's up to you. But these are my two little coats that I'm going to work on. I'm going to finish these tonight. I will try to post pictures on my website. If you guys have anything else that you're working on, this is Krabby Patty. For those of you who haven't started it yet, go ahead and start. This one's easy and fast. and there's going to be a lot more stuff. I'm working on some applique blocks for 2026, and I also have a couple more jelly roll quilt projects coming. So anyway, it says, how about making ornaments? I don't know if I have time. I really wish, Tina, that I had time for that. But anyway, I appreciate you guys, and I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye-bye.